All right, what's going on, everybody? It is that time of the year once again where I go down the list of all the manga that I've read and give you a ranking list of where they all fall right now. I usually do this at the end of every year. I do a top whatever manga list. I've done a top 10, I've done a top 25. But you know what? I've read enough manga at this point that I can give you guys a top 50. So that's what we're going to do. Obviously, I'm not going to go into crazy detail in all of the manga because the video would be way too long. Also, this is my list based upon personal preference. So this is not a matter of what is the best written manga or what do I think is the best artistic expression. This is just my personal favorites. So I'm just ranking it on what I like based upon my own personal taste and interests. So obviously my list is going to look a lot different than your list. The other thing right off the bat that I need to say is there is still a bunch of popular manga that I have not read, and they will not be on the list because I won't be including anything that I haven't read anything of. So no, One Piece is not on the list, JoJo's is not on the list, Bleach is not on the list, Jujutsu Kaisen is not on the list, and whatever other popular manga that you could name right now is also not on the list. There's also anime that I really enjoy, like Death Note or Inuyasha, but I have not read the manga counterpart, so I also cannot include those since I'm doing just strictly manga and not anime. But other than that, guys, just sit back and enjoy, and let me know what your list is down below. You don't have to rank, 50, but if you want to do your top 10, top 25. So this is just something I do at the end of every year to kind of regather my thoughts and talk about the manga that I've read. Now, I will be honest, once I got to about number 46 on the list, the final four, I kind of was just struggling to fill in the gaps here. Clearly, I need to read some more manga. Now, at number 50, I'm going to put right now, and this is only temporary, right now I'm going to put Blade of the Immortal. And the only reason it's down so low is because I've only read about 20 chapters of it, okay? So I need to read more of it. I have not finished it. So Blade of the Immortal is on the list just because I have read some of it, but I haven't gotten far enough to really be able to rank it yet. Same thing with number 49, Dorohedoro. I have started the manga. I've read a couple of volumes, but I have not finished it. So it's only at number 49 just based upon the fact that I haven't finished it yet. At number 48, I'm putting Gigantomaxia, which is a one-volume manga written by Kentaro Miura, which is the author of Berserk. It was kind of a side manga that he was doing for a while. It's got some interesting post-apocalyptic, kind of like almost Attack on Titan vibes to it. I really enjoyed it. It's a shame that it never got any further, but I like it for what it is. At number 47, I'm going to put Junji Ito's adaptation of Frankenstein. Frankenstein's always been one of my favorite stories by Mary Shelley, and I think that Junji Ito did a great job adapting it and just put some really sadistic, creepy images in the manga. I read it for the first time this past October, and I absolutely loved it. At number 46, I'm going to put All You Need Is Kill, which is another really short sci-fi manga about a character going into war against a bunch of alien creatures, and he dies right away. But then he wakes up the same exact day and he has to relive that day over and over, trying to get farther and farther, constantly dying, constantly getting reincarnated and living the same day over and over until you can figure out just what the hell is going on and how to combat these creatures. At number 45 is also the other Kentaro Miura side manga called Doranki, although this one was particularly worked on mostly by Studio Gaga. Most people say as a way to kind of train the staff to get accustomed to his art style, but I think this had a really fun, whimsical kind of fantasy vibe to it. It didn't get too dark yet, it never really had a chance to, but I really like the style and I like the beginning of the story. It feels kind of like The Lost Boys, but in a dark fantasy setting. There was something really interesting about this manga. Unfortunately, it did get canceled so that the team could specifically work on Berserk, but I really liked what we saw of Doranki, and I would love them to maybe go back to it someday. At number 44, I'm putting Tokyo Ghoul, and I know a lot of people would have this really, really high on their list, and I'm not saying anything is bad about the series itself. It just didn't gravitate to me as much as it did to some people. I still really enjoyed it. I love the kind of dark horror vibes to it, the ghouls themselves, and I think Kaneki is a really, really great protagonist. Just overall, I like a lot of other manga better. That's really what it comes down to. And number 43 is DRCL Midnight Children by Shinichi Sakamoto, who has some of the greatest artwork that I have ever seen in any manga or comic or just anything ongoing. Granted, I am quite far behind in this manga right now, but it is a loose adaptation of the Dracula novel. So I got a Frankenstein adaptation and a Dracula adaptation in here, and it's really, really great so far, especially the dark, horrific imagery within it. Definitely a horror manga for sure. I need to get back to it, but from what I've read so far, it's absolutely amazing, and I can't wait to continue it. Number 42 is another horror manga by the legendary Junji Ito with Tomi, or should I say Tomie? Sorry about that. The story of a girl that experiences an extremely dark and barbaric death and then all of a sudden begins to haunt many different people in many different ways. Really is a terrifying story. It's got a lot of different aspects to it, like a lot of different short stories kind of all in one, maybe similar to Uzumaki, and it all kind of flows into one narrative in one way or another, but it's really good and definitely a good Junji Ito story to check out. At my number 41 right now, I'm going to put Gigant, which is a story by Hiroya Oku, who is a mangaka that I really, really enjoy. This series in particular is definitely an acquired taste and a hard one to recommend. I don't really know how to even describe it shortly other than just there's a porn star that becomes a kaiju. It's honestly actually really good. Like there's stuff about, listen, okay, it's actually good. All right, just check it out. At number 40, I'm going to put Holy Land by Koji Mori, which is a street fighting manga starring a protagonist that is really, really engaging and emotional, and he goes through a lot of different journeys in order to try to become stronger. It's basically a story about a kid that starts off very, very weak and begins to get stronger within this kind of like underground street fighting scenario, and the level of detail that Mori puts into the fighting itself. You know, this guy is a big fighting fan, and I think he follows a lot of professional fighters and MMA and stuff, and he definitely incorporates a lot of knowledge of fighting within this story, as well as having a really compelling protagonist, so all of it works very, very well when it meshes together. At number 39, I'm putting Blame, which is this sci-fi story with some crazy artwork, basically about this giant space station that just continues to evolve and expand, and this character that is kind of wandering the wastelands within. A lot of crazy stuff goes down in this manga, and it really, really is captivating with just how hopeless it feels at times, but it's also really exciting. I don't know how quite to explain it, but it's definitely one that I would really recommend checking out, especially if you're a big sci-fi fan. And going into a completely different genre, at number 38, I have the manga Green Blood, which is a Western manga. It's very, very short, but it's basically sort of a revenge story involving two brothers, and again, the artwork is just out of this world in this manga, and I've always been a big Western fan as far as movies go, and I think this manga definitely captures the cinematic feeling of a lot of Westerns while also throwing in that Japanese, style and flair that manga is really known for. So it's a good blend, short story, amazing artwork, check it out. At number 37, I have Ino Asano's Dead Demons Destruction. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's a really good story about an alien invasion, although the story focuses on the friendship between two girls. And it's kind of interesting because the main primary focus of the story is the characters, and although there is an alien invasion happening, and it does play into the plot, and it is important, the relationship dynamic that you're watching is way more important than what's happening in the background, and it's kind of an interesting look of like how people would respond to just a giant spaceship floating overhead, and nobody really knows what's going on, but you have to continue to live and experience life, and I don't know, just check it out. There's an anime coming out for it soon. Number 36, I have another Junji Ito story, which is Hellstar Remina, basically about a giant planet that is on a collision course with Earth and how humans respond to it, which is another good look at humanity and how people use scapegoats to try to point to a person to blame all of their problems on, or just the mass hysteria of what it would cause. And again, just kind of feeling that sense of hopelessness of this inevitable end. So definitely a good story to check out, sci-fi sort of cosmic horror. At number 35, I have Goodbye Eerie by the author of Chainsaw Man, which is another very, very short manga, but it deals with a character that has lost the death of a parent and how he copes with that, as well as his friendship with another character that kind of plays into it. And it's a really, really interesting look at how we cope and mourn for somebody that we love that's no longer around, and how maybe things that we do seem strange to other people, but that everybody has to kind of process it in their own way. At number 34, I have another Sakamoto manga called Innocent, which takes place right before the French Revolution, and along with its amazing artwork, it also depicts the horrors of the execution style at the time, and its main protagonist is an executioner. This is before the guillotine, and the ways that people would go about just dismembering or destroying, cutting up, tying people to horses and watching them be ripped apart. This is definitely a very gruesome manga and not for the faint of heart, especially with how detailed the artwork can be, but it's also a very compelling story about an actual historical figure. At number 33, I have Planets by Makoto Yukimura, who is the author of Vinland Saga. This is a sci-fi style manga, although nothing kind of crazy happens. It really does deal a lot with human connection and being detached from people, and a lot of the outer space kind of scenery and setting really makes you feel that sense of isolation or, lack of connection, and it's a really interesting, short and sweet manga that I definitely recommend checking out. At number 32, I have Starving Anonymous, which is a horror manga about a character that wakes up in an underground facility with giant fucking bugs. Yeah, it's pretty good. At number 31, I have Violence Jack, which is by the creator of Devilman Go Nagai, which is this post-apocalyptic wasteland world where people are just trying to survive. Imagine a Mad Max-style world, except just like the title implies, incredibly violent, with a guy named Violence Jack who goes around with a giant knife and, does his thing. At number 30, I have Junji Ito's adaptation of No Longer Human. This is another manga that I read very recently this October, apparently based on a very famous Japanese novel about a guy that was just going through an incredibly dark, horrific lifestyle, dealing with tons of trauma in his past, trying to ignore it, trying to numb himself with alcohol and prostitutes, and just going down a really, really dark path. And at every opportunity he has to maybe change his ways or change his life or turn his life around, he ends up hurting more people, hurting himself. And it just really is overall like a very dark, depressing manga, but I think a very intelligent look at the mind and the way that somebody thinks when they're in this really, really dark kind of depressive state. It's very brutal, very realistic. So again, not for the faint of heart. There's no fantasy elements here. All the dark stuff is very, very real and raw and just put on full display without any censoring. At number 29, I have Record of Ragnarok, which is a battle tournament style manga that I am a little bit farther behind on, but I've really, really enjoyed everything I've watched so far. Basically about humanity versus the gods for the fate of humanity, to see if humanity still survives. And it's got all these different gods and deities from different religions that show up. You have Zeus there, you have Buddha, you have all of these different characters. So to me, someone who's not, religious, I just kind of have fun with it, and I just kind of enjoy seeing all of these different, deities and different religions and all of these things kind of come together into one giant battle arena, which is, I don't know, a lot of fun. At number 28, I have Baki, and with Baki and along with another manga I'm going to have on this list, they have multiple incarnations. I just kind of lumped it all into one. So there's Baki the Grappler, Baki Hanma, but it's all the same story. It's just different manga. I don't know. It can get a little bit confusing, but it's one of the greatest fighting manga of all time. I'm not fully caught up with it, but I really, really love this series, and there's no other series besides this and one other that just make me want to work out and go to the gym more than Baki does. Number 27, I have a manga called Homunculus, and I'll also put a warning on this one that this can get pretty dark and pretty gruesome and pretty raw. It's about a character that winds up being able to see sort of the psychological damage in other people, but he's also seeing reflections of himself, and the depictions and the artwork and some of the things he does, like tasting things, it can get kind of wild. So not for the faint of heart, but definitely a really interesting manga. At number 26, I have Parasite, which is a sci-fi series about a kid that gets an alien trapped within his hand, whereas these aliens are coming down like parasites, taking over people's minds, and it's basically kind of like a Invasion of the Body Snatchers type of thing, but also dealing with humanity's place in the universe and what it really means to be human. At number 25, I have Fist of the North Star, which is the other manga that really makes me want to work out and go to the gym. Just watching Kenshiro wander the wastelands and beat the ever-loving fuck out of all the evil bastards in the world. Listen, it might get a little repetitive, but I just can't help but get that catharsis every single time I see Kenshiro be a badass. At number 24, I'm going to put Uzumaki, which is my favorite Junji Ito story still, and it is actually the first Junji Ito story I read. Just The Curse of the Spiral. I can't really explain it. Can't really get into it without talking about specific scenes, but I would say it's a pretty good introduction to Junji Ito if you've never read any of his stuff. At number 23, I'm putting Claymore, which is a shonen series kind of taking place in a dark fantasy setting with a bunch of super strong female warriors called the Claymores. Has a really, really great main character, has a lot of conspiracy theories that are revealed as time goes on, and just some amazing artwork and battle sequences too. I would definitely highly recommend it. At number 22, I'm going to put Bastard, which is subtitled Heavy Metal Dark Fantasy, and that's exactly what this is. This is one of the most ridiculous, over-the-top manga that I have ever read, featuring a ton of medieval fantasy, spells, monsters, wizards, and a main character that is just so incredibly perverted and naked half the time. I don't even know what's going on. Scantily clad chicks. Somehow it turns into an existential space Evangelion series eventually, but never stops being as perverted as possible. At number 21, I am putting Akira, which is another manga I read for the first time this year. Although I was a fan of the movie for many, many, many years, I will say with certainty that the Akira manga definitely expands a lot more of the story and explains a lot more, and also shows a lot of crazy things that never got a chance to be expressed within the movie. And in the movie, there's like characters that are maybe important for one scene or 1 minute that are actually really, really fleshed out and have complete story arcs within the manga version. So I would definitely say if you want that kind of classic 80s cyberpunk manga, Akira is the way to go. At number 20, I have Devilman, which is a classic series that I think everybody needs to read if you're into manga. Although it can get a little bit dark and a little bit explicit, this is kind of the jumping off point that a lot of other creators use as their inspiration. You see it in almost everything, especially any manga dealing with any sort of darkness or hellscape or demonic entities. A lot of manga take inspiration from Devilman. I think it has a really, really important part to play within the history of this entire medium. At number 19, I have Monster, which is an incredible psychological series. It's one that I had a lot of fun with. I really like the anime version of it as well. And I think that this manga would be really, really well suited if somebody ever wanted to make some kind of live action adaptation, because it is grounded, it's realistic, it's adult. I think you could do this as like a limited series or something like that, but definitely worth checking out. But at number 18, I actually might be in the minority, but I like 20th Century Boys a little bit more than Monster. They're both created by the same author, Urasawa, but 20th Century Boys to me, I think, had this really fun sense of whimsy with the child characters and watching these characters grow up, and then also this big mystery element of who Friend is and what the conspiracy behind him is. And I'm a man that loved his conspiracy theories, so this manga just really, really appealed to me. At number 17, I have Chainsaw Man, which is still ongoing. Part 1 is complete, but Part 2 is going on right now, and I'm actually reviewing all of the chapters as they come out. Really, really enjoyed Chainsaw Man. I think it has potential to grow even higher on the list, but since it is still ongoing, right now it's going to sit at 17, but I still think that's a pretty good spot for it. At number 16, I have Full Metal Alchemist. What more can you say about this series? It's iconic. It's amazing. There's really no fault. There's no bad thing about this series. Like, there's really no negatives I can think of. The only reason it's at number 16 and not towards the top 10 is I just happen to like some other manga more, but I have nothing bad to say about this manga at all. At number 15, I have a manga called Eden. It's an Endless World. This is a really strange one, too, because it's very hard to describe. It is kind of science fiction. It is kind of dystopian, but it's really, really hard to find because there's really no English volumes that are out there. I had to find it online somewhere, but as I read through this, it does get very, very dark. It definitely shows war scenes. It shows people that get addicted to drugs. There's this weird kind of virus entity that exists. Dude, it just goes in a lot of crazy directions, but somehow manages to keep a very good narrative flow and nothing feels super out of place. I would definitely recommend it, but with caution. At number 14, I'm putting a series again that I read for the first time this year, and this is Alita. Now, Alita has a lot of different versions of the story. It's kind of similar to Baki in the sense that one manga will complete and then another manga is kind of like a sequel. So there's Alita Battle Angel, there's Alita Last Order, and there's Alita Mars Chronicle, which is still actually ongoing, although the releases are very, very sporadic. Alita became one of my favorite manga of all time after reading it. I absolutely fell in love with this character. I adore her so much. She is probably my favorite female protagonist that I've ever read. Alita is filled with wondrous action scenes along with really, really great stories about this conspiracy of how the world operates right now, what is happening off-world, what does it mean to be human, the cybernetics that are at play here. There's a lot of great stuff. And when you get to Last Order, it's basically like a giant tournament arc, but also in a strange, weird sci-fi space setting. I just love this manga so much, and I was just shocked at how much I liked it and how long it took me to actually get around to reading it. I just highly, highly, highly recommend reading the Alita manga. And number 13 is One Punch Man. What more can I say? This manga never fails to make me laugh. The story of Saitama just defeating everybody with one punch, but also still having really, really compelling stories and a great group arsenal of side characters like Genos and Garo and all of these other characters, Tatsumaki and my future wife, Fubuki. All of them have such great dynamics with one another, and you would think a story about a character that can beat everybody with one punch would be boring, but that is the testament to the writing of this story, that it continues to be so engaging and so hilarious, even almost 200 chapters later, still ongoing. It's still fantastic. At my number 12, I am putting Hellsing. This is a pretty short series, but has one of the most badass, overpowered main characters of all time with Alucard the vampire and a renegade group of like Nazi vampires that try to take over the world. And Alucard is just such an interesting case because, you know, he is the protagonist, but he is a vampire through and through, and he thrives on chaos and bloodshed, and just watching Alucard do his thing and put other people in their place, I just never get tired of it. Number 11 is Yoshihiro Togashi's Yu Yu Hakusho, and although I do enjoy the anime a bit more than the manga, it's still the same story, and to me, I think the manga is pretty fantastic. I love Yusuke as a protagonist. He's one of my favorite protagonists of all time, and this is a shonen series that I will always love, and honestly one that I see kind of mimicked a lot with more modern shonen, and I think that a lot of people should go back and experience Yu Yu Hakusho just to kind of see what inspired this new current generation of manga. So now the top 10, and my top 10 has not changed from last year. These are still my top 10 favorite manga of all time, so let's just barrel right through them. Number 10 is Inuyashiki, which is a sci-fi series about an elderly man as a protagonist, which I think is really unique and interesting, as well as a young teen character who both wake up finding themselves turned into cyborgs and the different directions that they choose to go down because of it. It is a very dark series, although very wholesome at the same time. It's by the author of Gantz, and it never gets quite as disgusting and dark as Gantz does. However, there are still those moments in there, and you could tell by it's by the same author, but it has a really, really wholesome message at the heart of it, and I think it's a beautiful manga that not enough people talk about. At my number 9, I still have Attack on Titan. I really, really love this series, and final chapter aside, I don't think it's bad enough to retroactively ruin the entire series for me. I still like the journey. I still love the discovery of figuring out what the Titans are. My favorite part of the series is actually the later half after the time skip, and it's a series that, regardless of how you think about it now after it's ended, it definitely will stand the test of time. Same thing with my number 8. This may be a simple choice, but Dragon Ball is peak. I really got nothing more to say about it. Dragon Ball is a great manga. It might seem overrated now, but if you go back and read I'm only talking about the original Akira Toriyama Dragon Ball. I'm not talking about the new stuff, but if you go back and read the original Dragon Ball, Akira Toriyama, it is wonderfully done, amazingly hilarious, tons of really well-drawn action sequences. The man knows how to panel his shit, and this is the baseline of how so many anime and so many manga have been inspired by. At number 7, I have Goodnight Poon Poon, which is another one that I would throw a warning label on. It definitely will delve into the mind of somebody going through intense despair and depression, but the interesting thing about Poon Poon is that it stars a character that begins as a child, like a very, very young character, and by the end of the manga grows into, I think, around his mid-20s. And so seeing that progression of his character, seeing the hope and optimism and the curiosity he has as a kid, as life and everything else in his own mind just slowly beat him down over time. The series gets darker and darker as it goes on. It shows that lots of people have skeletons in their closet. It's just a very, very dark, depressing series that depicts what it's like to be depressed in one of the most authentic ways I've ever seen. Number 6, I have Vagabond, which is the story of Miyamoto Musashi, one of the most famous swordsmen in Japanese history, and deals with his life story as he goes from being this sort of hot-headed young kid that wants to be the strongest in the world and then trying to figure out what being the strongest actually means. It has a lot of philosophy within it. It might not be super heavy on dialogue, but it has a lot of emotion. It has a lot of just really powerful themes that are displayed within just the artwork itself, and seeing Musashi kind of grow and develop into a man, like going from his adolescence into a man. There's a lot of really important lessons that are here to be learned within Vagabond. At my number 5, I have Gantz, which is a series that I adore. A lot of people think Gantz is overrated. A lot of people think Gantz is nothing but blood and tits. And first of all, there's nothing wrong with blood and tits. But second of all, I think Gantz is actually a really powerful story about the development of its main character, Kurono, who starts off very selfish, just very teenage boy-esque. And through this game of Gantz, where characters are sort of abducted and put into a room given weapons, given suits, and then thrown out into the world in order to face down an alien threat that is actually way more chaotic and way more violent than you could possibly imagine. It's a story about survival. It's a story, again, about what it means to be human. What is the value of human life? Why do we continue to try to survive? And just seeing the development of Kurono from being this really angsty, overly judgmental, super horny kid in the beginning to becoming a true leader and somebody that people can look up to and actually falling in love himself. It's a really, really great manga. To me, I think it's one of the best of all time. I know it has its criticisms. I know it's not a perfect manga, but again, if we're going with my top list of my favorite, Gantz is always going to be in the top 10, probably always in the top 5. And number 4, I have Hunter x Hunter, which is the other Yoshihiro Togashi story. And this is a strange one because if we're going by the anime, I probably like Yu Yu Hakusho a little bit more, but as far as like the writing and the manga itself, I think Hunter x Hunter has it beat. Just because I think Togashi was able to do things in Hunter x Hunter that he wasn't capable of doing in Yu Yu Hakusho. He's able to take his themes and ideas a little bit further. He gave us the Chimera Ant arc, which is just incredibly impressive. And if the manga ever finishes, right now it's in the Succession War arc, which is going to be arguably on par with Chimera Ant. So yeah, hopefully it finishes, but even if it doesn't, still one of the best of all time. At my number 3, I have Vinland Saga, which is currently in its final arc right now in the manga. I am also reviewing all the chapters of this as it comes out, so if you're a Vinland Saga fan, go ahead and subscribe. Similar to a lot of the other stories that I like, it's a great story about Thorfinn going on a quest for vengeance to begin with, that vengeance being taken away from him, and then him trying to decide what he is going to do with the rest of his life, put into these horrible situations of war and slavery, and then trying to create a world without that while also striving to be a better person. A lot of great themes, a lot of great messages within this manga, as well as really, really amazing artwork. Definitely highly recommend. My number 2 favorite manga, and probably will be for all time, is Rurouni Kenshin, and regardless of the controversy with the author, I think the story itself stands alone, and I can separate the art from the artist. It's a story that meant a lot to me. It is a story about redemption, about hope, about staying alive, and about the impact that you can have on other people's lives to try to make their lives better, along with incredible action sequences of samurai and swordsmen and ninjas and all that kind of stuff. Really, really great action series, but also delves into the emotional side of Kenshin and his history. And to me, I mean, this might sound really corny, but this is a series that really inspired me when I was younger. It was a series that I really needed when I was younger. And the more I go back to it, and whenever I reread it or watching the new anime version now, I'm just reminded about how much I love this series. So it's always going to be at the top for me. And my number 1 is obviously Dick Fight Island. I mean, how could you go wrong? There's dicks. We all know number 1 is Berserk. Do I even need to talk about it? Obviously, Berserk is number 1. I mean, come on. What'd you expect? Do I have to sell you on Berserk? Big man, big sword, themes of overcoming trauma and darkness, dealing with the darkness within ourselves, dealing with what humanity is capable of, living in a chaotic world and hoping for a better future while trying to become a better person. Also, Chestnut Puck. Anyways, guys, there you have it. That is my 2023 list of my top 50 favorite manga of all time. Again, this is just my list of my favorite, not what I think is particularly the best written, but just what I really enjoy. So let me know what you think of my list down below, as well as put your own list. And if you guys want to, I would really, really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel, stick around, check out some of the other videos. I have a lot of individual manga reviews of everything that I just mentioned. I have a manga review playlist. I have an anime review playlist, a movie review playlist, and I release videos at least 3, 4, 5 times a week to check out, as well as live streams. I have a Patreon that you guys can check out, and just lots of fun stuff here. I started streaming a lot of games, so there's lots of stuff on the channel to enjoy, so browse around, check it out. If it's something that you think is interesting, go ahead and subscribe. If not, that's okay. You don't have to, but I appreciate you giving it a chance nonetheless. So thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate you, and I'll talk to you next time.